Yeah, actually, I had one day where I had to cross-examine an FBI agent, and I had such great impeachment for this guy. He had lied like 3 or 4 times on his affidavits, was saying something completely different in court. And I was so excited. I was like, I'm going to kick some FBI ass. And it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it was my turn to cross-examine him, and the entire jury was falling asleep. So I just got up there and I projected. I used all of my acting training and woke them up. It was like going to be my moment, and they were all asleep.
So you and I met because I had interviewed Matthew Boyer.
Correct.
And his wife separately, who have been in the news recently because of his big case with the Ohtani scandal.
Correct.
Ohtani, the pitcher for the Dodgers.
Yes.
And he is doing time.
Yes.
He got his sentence, and he's doing how much? A year and a day?
He was sentenced to a year and a day, which means he'll get good time credits for the year that he's serving. He won't just have to do a straight year.
I told him it would benefit him if he actually did a lot of time and did some hard time, because that makes his case sound more severe.
I was at his 50th birthday party, and one of his friends, who's this very straight-laced broker, stockbroker, and he's usually very serious, and he's all very buttoned up. And he came up to me and he said, so if the judge sentences him to home confinement, can you ask him to give him 6 months, because it would be better for his brand?
Right. That's what I think the harder his sentence, the better his story.
Yeah.
How did you guys meet?
So I was introduced to Matthew Boyer through a mutual friend named Christopher Glue, who's a marijuana lawyer, and Chris doesn't do any federal work. So he called me up and he said, my pal Matthew Boyer has been raided by the feds, and can you come over and meet him? So we went over to his house that Saturday afternoon. I met him and Nicole and his son and his father-in-law, and we sat at the kitchen counter, and he told me what was going on. He said he'd been raided by the FBI, IRS, and Homeland Security, that they had seized a bunch of money, chips, Nicole's purses, which I was personally very upset about. And I really, at that point in time, did not know anything about bookmaking, about illegal bookmaking, or how it worked. Chris kind of filled me in a little bit because he's known Matt. They do jujitsu together and they've pals. I wouldn't be surprised if Chris was one of Matt's clients. And so it was a very new world to me. I really didn't understand how any of it worked. But he hired me, and that was how it started. That was how I met him. So I called the U.S. Attorney's Office, let them know that I was representing them. When somebody is raided by the feds, it is always wise to reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office so that you're not just sitting there waiting for the shoe to drop. You're not waiting for, Damocles' sword. You know that you have a little bit of control over what happens next. And I did know that they wanted Matt to cooperate, which means they wanted him to give them information about other parties and assist in the prosecution of these other individuals, entities. You can read between the lines. I'm not really supposed to talk about it because the investigation is ongoing. And that is actually why Matt's sentence was supposed to be delayed again and again, and he just wanted to get it over with, so he was sentenced at the end of August. And he said, look, if I have to do time, it's fine. I just need to get back to my life. But so I reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and what that does is that it prevents him from actually being arrested. So as he was raided and all of these agents descended on his house, what would happen in an arrest is the same thing. They would come out guns blazing, 30 or 40 guys, marshals, agents, and they would arrest him and take him into custody, and then he'd have to wait in custody until his initial court appearance, where we would try to agree to get him out on bond. And bond in federal court is very different. They don't use bail bondsmen, so you have to either have somebody who's going to sign for you like a surety, or you have to say, I have $100,000 in equity in my home, I'm really willing to post my home. Those are the different possibilities, or cash, if somebody wanted to deposit cash with the court, which they would get back at the end of the day. But these are things that we propose to the court, and then the court decides if they are going to accept our proposal along with conditions. Sometimes it's an ankle monitor. Certainly for Matt, it was no gambling, no bookmaking, and pay your taxes, things like that. So we avoid arrest when we are proactive, and then we also get an agreement. Like, yeah, he can come in on a summons, and then we'll agree to a bond, and he can leave that afternoon. So it's a much less stressful situation for somebody like Matt.
Software Underbelly is about giving people a space to tell their stories.
even when these stories challenge what we think we know. Ground News shows us different perspectives in the media, which is why Ground News is a perfect sponsor for my channel. In a world where algorithms censor much of the information we receive, some of the most important stories get missed from our news feeds. Ground News highlights local news from around the world, giving you an on-the-ground perspective that national coverage might miss. The app and website empowers you to form your own opinions by presenting you with every article published on any news story worldwide. My favorite part of the app is the data it gives you on each news source as you read it, such as where it leans on the political spectrum, a factuality rating indicating how subjective their printed reporting tends to be, and who funds it. I particularly like their blind spot feed, dedicated to showing you news stories that are underrepresented in the mainstream media. You can check this all out by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking the link below. It's easy to forget how much bias can shape the reality we live in. And in a world where our attention is constantly being fought over, my Vantage Plan easily helps me keep up with more important stories slipping through the cracks. So I encourage you to check them out at ground.news/SWU. Subscribe through my link or download the mobile app and enter promo code SWU to save 40% off their Vantage Plan. And by subscribing or even gifting it to someone you know, you're helping hold the media accountable and helping my channel directly. Thank you for watching.
So Matt said, I want to cooperate, but I'm not going to talk about myself, and I'm not going to talk about anyone in my organization, because he had some agents and sub-agents that he worked with, people that would basically bring him clients. And I said, that is never going to happen. I've been doing this almost 30 years, and they will only work with people who are willing to admit what they did, because otherwise you're not a credible witness. If you're not willing to get on the stand and say, yes, I did what I did, I'm guilty of this, that, and the other thing, then you're useless as a witness. And if they make any promises to you up front, like say, you're going to get home confinement if you cooperate, then the defense attorney for those people is going to be able to rip you apart, because they're going to say, well, you were promised no jail time in lieu of 18 years in prison, so obviously you're going to say anything that they want you to say. And so they don't make any promises. You don't know what your sentence is going to be until basically 2 weeks before you're sentenced. And you have to be willing to tell them everything. So when Matt said, I'm not talking about myself, I'm not talking about anybody in my world, I said, that's never going to happen, but I'll ask. And I called the U.S. attorney and she said, okay. And I was stunned. So Matt and Chris and I went up to the Homeland Security office in Long Beach, I believe it was, because the 10 was closed. I don't know if you remember when that happened. And we spent about 3 hours and he answered all their questions. The one question that he had to answer about himself was, are you an illegal bookmaker or were you? And he said yes. He was joking with them when they raided the house. And they said, are you a bookie? And he said no. And so they were going to charge him with lying to a federal agent. And he was clearly just joking around with them. Obviously, everyone knew that he was a bookie. So after that conversation, it was, he hired me in October. We met with the feds in November. And then in January, I got a call, or he actually got a certified letter from Tisha Thompson from ESPN saying, I'm writing a story about Shohei Ohtani as your client. And so apparently, I just learned this a couple weeks ago, Chris and Matt invited Tisha to Matt's house. And she told them everything she knew. And then they were going to either confirm or deny whatever information she had. So what I thought had happened was that Chris had a conversation with Tisha. I had no idea they went to Matt's house behind my back. But anyway, Matt thought I was going to be madder than I was. And but Tisha knew everything. She knew dollar amounts. She knew names of people. She knew who was receiving wires for Matt from Shohei Ohtani. She really knew a lot. So at that point, we did a three-way call. Chris, Tisha, me, and Matt. We had Matt just keep his mouth shut unless I asked him to jump in. And when she said, is Shohei Ohtani your client? He said no. And he said the only person that he'd ever dealt with was Mitsuhara. But he was getting $500,000 wires from Shohei Ohtani's account. It was actually being sent to his friend. And when he saw that, he thought, maybe Shohei Ohtani is my client. But he had met Mitsuhara at a poker game in San Diego. He was introduced to him by, I guess, a former baseball player named David Fletcher. And it was like after an Angels game or something, they were playing poker. And so Mitsuhara started betting with Matt. Started small, and over about a year and a half, the bets got larger and larger and larger, and he ended up placing 19,000 bets with Matt over a year and a half. And the bets went from $50 to $100 to $1,000 to $250,000. And I don't remember what the highest number was, but they were pretty big. And so Matt started getting these wires from Shohei Ohtani, and the money laundering aspect of it, which is a concept that most people don't understand. It's hard sometimes for lawyers to grasp. But basically, anytime you take ill-gotten gains and move them, if it's more than $10,000, that's money laundering. Essentially, spending it is money laundering. They can make anything into money laundering. This was actually what you would imagine, which was the money was going to his friend and then from his friend to the casino. Then Matt and his friends would go to the casino, they would get credit, and they would gamble. And they were gambling huge numbers, millions and millions of dollars. I think one night Matt lost $4 million. So he was what they call a whale in the gambling industry. And he was being given all the perks, penthouses, jets, private jets to amazing sporting events. He played golf with famous people that I don't even know. But so this was next level, but the money was going from Shohei Ohtani's account to his friend's account to the casino. And so Matt just thought, great. And he kept extending credit to Mitsuhara because he was getting these wires every 2 weeks and was bragging about it, of course, because that's marketing, right? You say, oh, Shohei Ohtani is my client. And so more and more people were respecting him. But he was already, according to him, one of the top 5 bookies in the country. And apparently everyone in Las Vegas knew he was a bookie, and he would be running his business right on the phone in the casino, to the point where the pit boss or the dealers would say to him, can you maybe take that into the bathroom? Like, don't do it right under our noses. And so let me go back to the Tisha Thompson story. So she wanted to know if Shohei Ohtani was his client. And at that point, he said no. I'd never met Shohei Ohtani, spoke to him, texted him, no dealings except for the wires. And she knew about the $500,000 wires. She knew who they were going to. And so after about an hour and a half of answering questions, yes or no, occasionally letting Matt talk, she said, all right, I'm going to have to go back and do more journalism because this is a different story than what I understood it to be. But just so you know, the feds are going to leak this story to the LA Times. So that was really interesting. And sure enough, 3 months later in March, I got a call from a reporter from the LA Times saying, we're writing a story about your client, Matthew Boyer, and that Shohei Ohtani was his client. And I said, Shohei Ohtani was not my client's client. And he goes, well, then why are no, he said, why is the FBI so certain that he is? And I said, well, you're going to have to ask the FBI that question. And by the way, you just revealed your source. And he goes, no, I didn't. And I'm like, yeah, you did, dude. But anyway, so for the next 5 days, actually, let me back up a second. So after I got the call from the guy from the LA Times, I immediately called Tisha Thompson because she had so much integrity by not writing the story saying that Shohei Ohtani was Matt's client when we said he wasn't. So I really respected her for that. So I immediately called her and I said, guess what? You were right. The feds leaked the story to the LA Times and they're ready to run with it. She said, okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. And then she immediately got in touch with Mitsuhara and apparently interviewed him for like an hour and a half. And the first story that he told her was that I think Ohtani had loaned him the money for his gambling. But the big issue is, of course, baseball players are not allowed to gamble, especially on baseball.
Is that really the case?
Yes.
Is that why this is such a big case?
Yes.
They're suspicious that Ohtani was betting on sports?
Yes. So like Pete Rose was fired from baseball, and Ohtani would have been fired certainly from the Dodgers. And, of course, MLB didn't want that.
But he's continuing to play.
He's continuing to be one of the most famous players in the world.
Yeah.
According to everybody else.
Yes.
So it was going to be a really, really big deal. So when the LA Times guy said, I'm writing this story, and I said, no, he wasn't his client. He goes, well, we're going to write it anyway. I said, really, seriously, you are the LA Times, and you're going to ruin the Dodgers' greatest player ever over a story that we can't confirm as the actual source of information? And so that's when the conversation started. For the next 5 days, Tisha and this guy from the LA Times, who I don't even remember his name, he was a jerk, were constantly calling me, asking me questions. And then about 5 days later, Tisha sent me an article, texted me an article at 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was the LA Times story saying that Mitsuhara had stolen the $17 million from Ohtani. And then like minutes later, I think it was, that Tisha Thompson issued her story, which was much more thorough. It was much more thoroughly researched. She had much more information. I had given her more information, but she already knew a lot more. And she named names. She named Matt's friend who was taking the wires. And then she went on whatever that ESPN news thing is that she does, sports channel or something like that. You can tell I'm not a sports person. She explained how she had interviewed Mitsuhara and that he had said that he had gotten the money from Ohtani, that Ohtani loaned him the money. And then suddenly, I guess, agents got involved, MLB got involved, and then the next day the story was that Mitsuhara stole the money from Shohei Ohtani. What's interesting is that a few weeks later, they were in Korea at the time in spring training. And I don't know how much time passed, but a couple weeks later, Mitsuhara actually called me because he asked Matt for a referral for a criminal defense attorney because he knew he was in trouble. And Matt gave him my number, of course. And I said, I can't represent you. But my first just knee-jerk response when he called me was, you came back? Because he'd been in Korea. He knew he was going to be indicted and then deported after he served a sentence. He said, oh, I shouldn't have come back. And I said, well, if your family is here, obviously you had to do the right thing. And I said, I'm sorry that you've lost your best friend. And he said, this was all me. I did it. And he didn't say those words, but he said, I did this to myself. And I just said, look, I can't talk to you. I can't represent you. And I referred him to a friend. My friend spent about 3 hours with him, and he believed that he actually did steal the money. He unfortunately did not hire my friend, which I think he should have. But at the end of the day, he was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, which given the amount, which we refer to as the amount of loss in federal court, 5 years was a very gentle sentence for him. I think that they probably took into consideration the fact that he's going to be deported at the end of it, but honestly, I don't know. I wasn't part of those conversations. I do know it was the same U.S. attorney that was on our case. So in the interim, after Tisha Thompson called, Matt had a cooperation agreement with the feds, with the government. So I immediately called the U.S. attorney. I said, we need to come see you right now. So we all changed our schedules. We drove up to L.A., and we sat down with two of the U.S. attorneys, an FBI agent, and I think a Homeland Security agent. I don't think the IRS agent. He was the lead. The IRS agent, Chris Seymour, was the lead agent on the entire case because the tax charges were kind of the driving force. And we told them, look, Tisha Thompson called us. This story is coming out. And they could not have cared less. They were like, yeah, let's talk about this other thing that we've been talking about. And I said, no, this is not open cooperation. This is the only reason we came up here. And the U.S. attorney was like, oh, have you been to that new barbecue place in San Juan Capistrano? Like, he could not have cared less. So we walked out of there kind of confused. Then the story came out, and they were interested. And I have never seen somebody actually get indicted by the grand jury that quickly. It took them 2 or 3 weeks before he was indicted. So in that time period, they had seized all of Matt's electronics, and his website where people bet was on his computer. And I think that, I don't know if he had to give them his password, but they had the password, so they were able to get all of the information, and the forensics teams were dealing with all the information on the website. But they asked us, can you get us a spreadsheet of Mitsuhara's bets? And it was much easier for Matt to call the server of the website, which was based in Costa Rica, and say, hey, I need this ID number. I need all the bets, because everybody bets with an ID number, not a name. And again, he didn't know for sure if maybe Ohtani was using Mitsuhara's ID number. The only way he knew that it wasn't Ohtani was because he'd be watching the Angels at the time, and Mitsuhara would be playing, and he'd see on his website that bets were being placed under that ID number. So he knew that it wasn't Ohtani. And so we gave him, the government, a 268-page spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. You can imagine how much information was on that, of all of Mitsuhara's bets. Then they also asked Matt what the time zone was, where the website was, so they could see the times of day that the bets were being placed, obviously, to make sure it wasn't Ohtani. And they asked him a few more questions, and that was pretty much it. Within a couple of weeks, he was indicted. And so Matt was given cooperation for that credit. And then while we were talking to them about that, I guess they brought up David Fletcher. And we said, oh, yeah, and by the way, so-and-so is David Fletcher's bookie. And they were like, oh, that's very interesting. So Matt also got credit for that information. But I know Matt was really upset because that friend was up in arms about the fact that Matt named him. They had his cell phones. They had all of his text messages. They had all of his whatever apps he used to talk to people. And they had his bets, his bank accounts, everything, because the feds get everything. And so they knew. So for him to confirm something was really not a big deal as far as ratting somebody out, because I know Matt was really, really sensitive about that.
Interesting. So it looks like Ohtani might be okay?
I think so. And I mean, I saw the press conference. I believed him. He seemed sincere. He seemed really heartbroken. I think he played really badly that night. He lost his best friend and confidant. But Ohtani's fine. He will be fine.
Yeah. So what made you want to become a defense attorney?
So it was kind of a windy road to get here. I started out life as a ballerina. I had studied ballet starting when I was 8 years old. I grew up in a small town in Long Island, but I had the great good fortune of having an amazing woman who was from the original Ballet Russe, who had this little ballet studio in our town. And so I studied, and I would go into New York City on the weekends and take classes with, professional dancers. And that was all I ever wanted to do, was dance. But somewhere in the back of my mind, knowing how absolutely competitive ballet world is, and I was never anorexic, and I was a little short to be a dancer, it was always in the back of my mind, if I can't dance, I'll go to law school, which was more of if I can't do it, I I'll make a living, kind of a practical solution. And I had no idea what it meant to be a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer, but he died when I was 8 years old. So honestly, I just no idea what that meant. I just knew that was a practical thing to do. And so after my first year of college as a ballet major, I was injured. And so I transferred to UC Irvine and was a drama major. I was like, well, what else do I want to do? I was looking through the course catalog, and I'd always been in plays my whole life, and I sing. So I thought, I'll just do that. That'll be fun. And it was the best 3 years. It was absolutely incredible. I learned, I read all of the classics. I read a lot of Shakespeare, and I met the most amazing people. And it was an incredible experience. And then as I was about to graduate, I had a theatrical manager say to me, pretty face is a dime a dozen in LA. If you sing and dance, you should go to New York. So I put my tail between my legs and I went back to New York. I had no idea how to even start to pursue a career. Of course, I got a job as a waitress, which is what you do. And I spent 4 years in New York City waitressing, teaching exercise, going to dance classes, voice classes, acting classes, and auditions, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night because I would waitress at night, teach exercise at 7 in the morning. I was on the subways at 6 in the morning and, counting rats while I was waiting for the trains. It was very not glamorous. And after 4 years and 4 days of extra work, I walked out of ABC Studios where I'd done extra work on all my children. And I just looked up at the marquee and I said, this is not what I have spent my life studying for. I studied ballet for years and years with some of the greatest teachers in the world. And I have a degree in drama. And I just, at that point, was tired of scraping literal coins together to pay my rent. And I was living with a musician who ended up actually being the lead singer for Tower of Power. He was an R&B singer. If you didn't see him, you would think he was Black. He has this incredible soul voice. He's a white boy from Massachusetts. And I came home to see my mom, came back to California to visit my mom, and she literally dragged me kicking and screaming into the Swallows, which is the famous saloon in San Juan Capistrano where the Swallows return. And there was a country band playing, and this guy and I locked eyes, and that was it. I moved back to California, and he talked me into going to law school. And again, I just had no idea what I was getting myself into. Just like with Matt's case, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea this was going to blow up and be this huge media story. I just thought I was representing some bookie guy. And with law, I had no idea what I wanted to do with it or how I was going to use it. And got into law school kind of last minute, moved up to LA, and it was 3 of the most brutal years of my life, complete opposite of my undergrad degree. I studied 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and studying for the bar was pure hell. Taking the bar exam, they have ambulances outside in case people have panic attacks because it is so stressful. Like, you don't drink water because you don't want to take 5 seconds to go to the bathroom because you only have a limited amount of time. It was the most stressful experience. And, just really not how my brain is used to working. I'm much more of a creative person. And actually, my second year of law school, I went to Lake Arrowhead with my friend Emma, who was kind of my support system throughout law school. And I just sat there and cried because I was like, what have I gotten myself into? I had borrowed so much money and I hated it. But I graduated with honors and got a job, believe it or not, with an aviation litigation firm in downtown LA. Could not have been more boring. It was absolutely hell. And I was sitting on the 36th floor of a skyscraper in downtown LA thinking, oh my God, what have I done? The Talking Heads song was my anthem. And so I quit after 2 years, rented a little guest cottage in Laguna Beach from this beautiful family, and did some appearances. I went to massage school. And I spent 6 hours a day sitting on the beach, and I read books, and I tried to figure out what to do with my life. And it was so interesting because during that time period, 2 different people, one was a public defender and one was a DA, and they both said to me at different times in completely separate settings, I really think you would enjoy being a public defender. So I went to see a lawyer that I know, and he goes, so what are you doing these days? And I said, I'm thinking of maybe applying to the public defender's office. And he picked up the phone, and I had an interview the next day, and I got the job. So I spent 2 years working in the public defender's office, and it was baptism by fire. I did 24 trials in 24 months. I knew nothing about criminal defense, but this was home. This was where I finally found my purpose, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it because I was in court all the time, and I was helping people, and I was interacting with people. And, talk about drama. That is real drama. And it was just incredible. And also, talk about the soft white underbelly or just the underbelly of society. I had never been exposed to this before. And I was meeting gangbangers, and I was meeting addicts, and I was meeting just people that I never would have met any other way. And I found this work just so incredibly rewarding. And after 2 years at the PD's office, I went into private practice and was appointed to the federal panel where I get appointed cases from federal court, so I learned all about federal cases, and there I got to work on cases I never would have worked on as a private attorney, like MS-13, huge Mexican mafia gang cases involving murder and drugs, and I was actually represented an Aryan Brotherhood guy. For a short period of time, I was backup counsel, and this is actually one of my best stories. I went to see him. He was on death row because they were facing a death penalty. There's a detention center in downtown LA called MDCLA, Metropolitan Detention Center, and they have the 8th floor is reserved for people facing death sentences. And so it's much more high security. So you go through all of the security stuff downstairs, you lock your stuff up in the locker, and then I went up to the 8th floor for the first time. And then there's even more. You have to show your ID again. You have to leave anything with the agents or the officers that are sitting outside. And there is a glass window where they can see you. I couldn't see them. So they bring me into this room, which is just this room with a table and chairs. And then they go and get my client out of his cell. And I see him through the window come shuffling down the hall in his shackles with his handcuffs, and he's pushing a cart that has a computer on it. And he gets in the room and he kneels down. They take off his cuffs. He comes in. He's got long blonde hair or gray hair, a big beard. And he comes in, just looks at me, doesn't say anything, pushes his computer around the table and behind me to plug it in. And I'm wearing pumps like I'm wearing today. And he goes back and sits down. And the first thing he said to me was, "You could kill someone with those shoes." And I just went, note to self, no longer wearing high heels to jail to visit people. But it was the only time, I think, there was maybe one other time in my career where I was scared. And I've met some, what most people would think are really scary people, like people, with gang tattoos on their faces. I was fine with them. Some of them were really nice guys. In fact, I have one guy that's still calling me years and years and years later. His mom and his daughter call me. But this guy scared me. And yeah, that was my Aryan Brotherhood case. So I was able to work on cases that I never would have been able to work on as a private practitioner because people don't necessarily have the funds to hire a private lawyer. But after a while, it became a bit of a crutch, and I was really relying on the court. And then there were a lot of other issues involved that I won't get into. But so I've been just doing exclusively private work for now about 12, 15 years. I don't even know how long it's been. But I get to meet really incredible people, and every day is different. Every case is different. And I get to really go to bat for these people. And the thing I pride myself the most on is that I really get to know who they are. And I understand why they did what they did, because I will tell you that crime does not happen in a vacuum and that people don't do terrible things for no reason. I will say that the majority of my clients have had the most traumatic upbringings. I've heard stories of people who have, this one guy told me that he saw his father punch his mother and rape her. I think it might have been the same guy or maybe another guy who said that his parents were heroin addicts. His mom walked up to his dad and shot him. The bullet grazed his skull, and the kid was standing right there. I think he was like 12 years old or younger. And his dad just looked at him and said, "Don't worry, son, that bitch can't kill me. I'm the devil." No wonder people become drug addicts, and no wonder people get into situations. I mean, I always say to judges, but for the grace of God, go you and I. Because most people do not have the privileges that the rest of us have. They do not have parents who will feed them and support them. And our clients that are from Mexico, we learn to ask questions like, did you have a floor or was it dirt? Did you have running water? Did you have to go get water from the stream? Things that we so take for granted, things that we don't even think about when we turn on a light switch. So many people have not had those advantages. Or people that are immigrants that come here and they are jammed into a room, 8 kids sharing 2 mattresses and living on very little food, and their parents are gone working all day, every day. So of course they become involved in gangs because they want to fit in, they want to belong, they want to be somebody. And so it's been so eye-opening and so interesting to understand why people do the things they do and why they are who they are. And at their core, they're really good people and they mean well. They've just not had a chance. And I see this over and over and over again. What's interesting is that I would say the more difficult clients are the white-collar clients who have education and they are professionals and they can't admit to themselves that they've committed a crime. They'll admit to the elements. They'll say, yes, I did this, that, and the other thing. But I was going to give the money back, or, with the COVID funds that people were getting, and people would lie on their applications and then invest the money. Oh, but I was going to give the money back. But you still got $3 million that people that really needed it didn't get, and you lied to get it. Yeah, but I'm not a criminal. And it's just so interesting to me, the mindset. Like, well, I agree you're not a criminal, but you committed a crime. Who you are isn't a criminal at your core. But you screwed up, dude, And so that's just so interesting to me, because the people that are, bank robbers are going to say, I did it. I just want to get a deal. Just get me sentenced. And then it's my job to get them the most reasonable sentence I can under all of the circumstances, taking into consideration who they are as a person and what they've been through and why they committed the crime that they committed, not just this is what I did and that's it. And so, bam, here's your sentence. So there's just so much more to it. People always ask, how do you defend guilty people? 98, 99% of my clients are guilty, and they will tell me that they're guilty. It's my job to walk them through the system because it's terrifying. And this is what I do. I hold their hand through the process. I try to make it as comfortable, if that's possible, as possible. Explain everything to them, explain everything to their families. and then convince the prosecution, whether it's the DA, the Attorney General, or the U.S. Attorney's Office, that this person does not deserve to just be thrown into a prison cell or warehoused, because we imprison so many people in this country. Way too many people spend time just wasting away in prison. And it just doesn't serve society. It doesn't serve them. It doesn't serve anyone. So that's why I do what I do.
And you enjoy it.
I love it.
Clearly. Do you feel like it was just dumb luck that you ended up a criminal defense attorney instead of a ballerina or
100%.
Or whatever you might have done?
100%. I had actually applied to the DA's office when I was in law school and after I got out of law school. And I didn't get the job. I missed the hiring by like one person. And I ran into that guy who had been the hiring attorney at the DA's office years and years later. And I said, I just want to tell you that I appreciate you so much for not hiring me those 2 times. Because, I just didn't know. I didn't understand. I thought, oh, you want to put away the bad guys. You want to put away the drug dealers. But at the end of the day, I think that defense attorneys are the ones that wear the white hats. We're the ones that ride the white horses and fight the good fight, because we have a Constitution that has to be upheld. We have the 4th and 14th Amendment rights, 5th Amendment, you have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And what's happening right now with ICE is insane. I actually represented a young woman who was a U.S. citizen, a Hispanic woman. She had just been dropped off for work in downtown LA, and 4 or 5 SUVs pulled up, guys in plain clothes with masks. They were wearing vests. And everyone started to run. She had no idea what was happening, and she just stood there. And they threw her to the ground. She had bruises all over her back. She held up her tote bag, whatever she was carrying, to work. And they grabbed her and arrested her. And they were speaking to her in Spanish, and she was saying, I speak English. I'm a citizen. And they didn't believe her. They actually pepper sprayed the guy that was with her, because they punched him and pepper sprayed him. And there are videos of him on social media where he's convulsing, and he had to ended up going to the hospital once they were arrested. But they were arrested. They were taken to MDC, the same facility. And she was kept there actually for 2 nights. Usually it's 1 night. These ICE agents who arrested her posed for a photo with her, like a look who we got kind of a photo, just absolute gangbanger mentality. And she spent 2 nights in jail and was released on bond the next day. So she was 2 nights in jail, released on bond the next day. And the complaint, the charging document, she was charged with assaulting a federal agent. The allegation was that she raised her arm and hit the agent in the face with her arm. She's 4'11", and this agent was a gorilla. There is no way it was physically possible for her to have hit him. So I asked the U.S. attorney. The complaint said that this was based on body-worn camera footage, which of course they don't wear body-worn cameras, and witness statements. So I asked for them. And 2 days later, he said, I'm going to dismiss the complaint. So we're actually going before a public forum. Several senators, Senator Blumenthal's chief investigative counsel has reached out, and we're going to go talk to them in Washington, D.C. next month about what's happening here. But people's rights are being violated every day. Every day, these people are going out and being arrested for absolutely no reason, just because of the color of their skin. And it's outrageous. And so I am extremely proud to be a criminal defense attorney and somebody I am a gatekeeper. I hold the line. I hold law enforcement accountable. So if they haven't done things properly, if they, illegally search somebody's car or search their home or search their person, I'm going to be pounding my fist in the courtroom and telling the judge, this doesn't stand. You have to dismiss this case. And that is the really exciting part, along with the fact that we have a really tight community. Criminal defense attorneys, we fight a common enemy. And so we share information with each other. We help each other. We appear for each other. We really, really support each other in our work. And, they say 2 heads are better than 1. Well, 100 heads are certainly better. So I love brainstorming with my friends, my colleagues, and saying, hey, I have this case. Can I talk to you about it? Yeah, sure. And we'll sit and do research together, and we'll talk about it and come up with the best plan. And, sometimes they'll smack me and say, you're being too naive or you're being too gullible. This client, maybe you shouldn't be, But I do tend to believe my clients when they tell me what they tell me. And that's just my nature. Somebody told me a long time ago that you have to develop a tougher skin, and I always thought that would never happen because I'm a sensitive person. I guess it's happened because I get cases and they don't faze me.
It happens very slowly.
It happens very slowly, exactly like the frog in the boiling water.
Mm-hmm.
I, will deal with child pornography cases and I don't get upset. I'm not offended. I'll take your case because I understand it's an illness. I understand that this was a rabbit hole that you fell into. And you started at looking at porn, and then all of a sudden you're looking at other images, and it's an addiction. It gets worse over time, and people get stuck in it. So I don't judge people. And that was interesting. That was my interview for the public defender's office. It was a series of hypotheticals. It was the most difficult interview of my life. And after I got the job, my boss told me that the questions are designed to determine whether or not you're a judgmental person. I thought that was so interesting and so beautiful because, I don't judge my clients. You want to tell me something? Trust me, I've heard everything. Mm-hmm. I am not going to judge you. I don't care what you did. I'm just here to help you through this process.
As a defense attorney, a criminal defense attorney, what kind of clients do you end up representing?
So I'll represent, people who commit fraud, investment fraud, Medicare fraud, bank fraud, real estate fraud, mortgage fraud. I mean, there are every kind of fraud. There's, tax fraud, tax evasion, a lot of drug cases. The federal government tends to charge people with conspiracies. So anybody who may be involved in a drug transaction would get swept up in a conspiracy. I represent people charged with domestic violence. I represent people, as I said, who are charged with possession of child pornography, kind of pretty much anything. The only thing I don't really do is DUIs because I just don't.
So a lot of variety.
A lot of variety, and it's never boring. It's never dull. Every case is completely different, and I'm always learning things. Like, I knew nothing about guns. Now I know about guns because I've had gun cases. I knew nothing about narcotics or about, what things cops are looking for, and especially with fraud, what kinds of questions, because these are more corporate-oriented issues. And so I can tell when I'm sitting in a meeting with agents, federal agents, a U.S. attorney, and my client by the questions that they're asking, what they're trying to get at. And I can even fine-tune the questions for them and say, I think this is what they want to know. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly honing my skills.
What kind of things have you learned? Because you're learning
really
important things about it.
For instance, the Paycheck Protection Program, which was the COVID funds that people got, and I've learned about what was required to get these loans, because when they came out, everybody was like, free money, let's sign up for it, and that how that worked, how that process worked. I've learned about Medicare billing. Like, how would I have ever known about anything to do with that? Or mortgage refinancing back in the days, a decade or so ago when that was a big thing and everybody was going into foreclosure because of the bubble that burst. I don't even know. I've learned about, certainly about addiction, about every kind of addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, sex addiction. There's just so many aspects to what I do. And, we're called attorneys. We're also called counselors. And you are a counselor. You counsel your client through the process, but there is also a psychological element. And I am not a therapist. I refer people to therapists. I refer them, we have all of our resources, people we send them to. There are rehab programs that we work with.
But in doing what you do, you almost have to become a bit of a therapist.
But yeah, and also to know who to send people to. And we get psychological evaluations in a lot of cases where if I think that somebody may have an undetected traumatic brain injury, that's something else I've learned about. Like, why is this person acting this way or talking this way, or there's something not right here? I think I need to have them evaluated. And lo and behold, you'll find out that there's some sort of a diagnosable issue, which, by the way, gambling addiction is in the diagnostic manual for therapists. It is a what's the word? But it is a specific illness, according to, or mental issue that is listed. I can't think of the words right now. But it's very interesting to learn about all of these issues. And then also learning about, how we as a community of lawyers have to take care of ourselves because we are exposed to so much trauma, as you are in your work. You hear stories, you hear traumatic stories, you hear about people's lives. You do hear about victims. Of course, we're sympathetic to victims if there are any in cases. And you take that home with you. So yes, as you said, you get numb over time, but you're still surrounded by difficulties and hardship and depression and trauma. And you have to learn how to walk away from it. I remember very early on in my career, my husband said to me late one night, like 2 a.m, "Are you thinking about so-and-so?" My client at the time, another Mexican mafia guy. And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Stop it. You're not the one going to prison." But it took years for me to let go. And I'll tell you, when the marble dropped for me, I had done a trial. It was bank robbery. It was actually I can't think of the word again, but one of these places where, I'm sorry, I can't think of the word, but it was like a bank robbery. And there were these 3 black guys. And 15 months later, my client was ID'd in a photo lineup. So I hired an eyewitness identification expert, something else I've learned about. And this woman explained to me that if somebody's wearing a hoodie, that makes it unreliable. If the person has a gun, the victim is looking at the gun, not the person. If there is a person of a different race, that definitely compromises their ability to identify the person. Time, of course. So there were all of these indicia of unreliability in this case, and I really believed that my client was innocent. His friends had committed the crime, so his hoodie was in the car, so they got his DNA. And then they called him after they were done, which was ridiculous. So it was just that the U.S. attorney kept arguing, yeah, that's a coincidence. Yeah, that's a coincidence. And this was the case where the FBI agent was lying, and I got to cross-examine him when the jury was sleeping. But that was one I couldn't let go of. The jury came back, 3 black men, mostly white jury, 3 hours, came back guilty, and I couldn't let it go. So I called my co-counsel on that case, and I said, "I just can't let it go." And he said, "All we can do is our best. We play a role. We are a cog in the wheel. We play a specific role, but we have no control over the outcome. And as long as we can accept that and we do our best, we have to let it go or we'll just go crazy." And the marble dropped for me. It was my moment of Zen. I realized that he was right. And from then on, I've had a much easier time. There have been moments, of course, where I've just been so upset about a verdict or a sentence. But the bottom line is I have no control. It is up to the judge. It is up to the prosecutor. It is up to the jury. All I can do is fight like hell, which I promise I do every single time. And once I've done that, I can walk away and say, all right, I did my job, and now whatever happens, happens. Is it justice? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but it's what happens.
How often do you think preconceived biases or prejudices color our view of somebody?
All the time. People have unconscious bias. People have implicit bias. Another thing I've learned about. Yeah, absolutely. If somebody needs an interpreter because they're speaking Spanish, obviously the jury is going to view them differently. And we get a very limited opportunity to speak to jurors, to pick the jury. And, you see TV shows where they're asking all these questions. That's theatrics. We get very little time with them. The judge asks most of the questions. We take notes very quickly. We get up, ask a couple follow-up questions, and then we have to just kick the people that we have a bad feeling about. Maybe somebody whose father was a cop and, believes an officer over anybody else. But of course people's biases play into it. And something else that's really frustrating to deal with as a defense attorney is that prosecutors and agents or cops, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. So they see things in black and white. They see things from their perspective. You're guilty, you did it, we have the evidence, and they don't want to hear anything else. So recently I submitted a bunch of witness statements to a DA on a child molest case. My client's accused of molesting his granddaughters. He swears he didn't do it. All of his nieces have said, we've spent the night at his house. He's never touched us inappropriately. We've seen these girls with him. They're always so happy to see him. They hug him, call him Papa. Like, there's no way that this happened. And the girl's dad always wants money. He said, no, this is a vendetta. And, the DA's made up her mind. She's going to trial. The girls want to testify. We're going to trial. And chances are my client will be convicted because juries are going to believe these girls. No matter what we say, the jury's going to believe these girls, I think. But can I let him take that chance? the saving grace of my career is that I don't make that decision. My clients decide whether they're going to go to trial or plead guilty. So all I can do is advise them and say, look, if we go to trial, this could happen. You could be looking at 17 years or 18 years in prison. If you take a deal, you're maybe going to do 5. But the decision is yours. Whatever you want to do, I'll fight like hell. You let me know. And I sent the DA these statements, and I really want to know, just did it change her mind at all about the case? And I honestly just don't think that it will, because they see things in black and white. And that's why it is so frustrating. Again, people say, how do you defend guilty people? The hardest part of my job is dealing with prosecutors and judges, because it's sometimes very much like banging my head against a brick wall. It is just impossible to get through to them sometimes. I love federal work because federal prosecutors are usually, Ivy League educated. They've worked in a big firm for years before they got their job in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're very smart. They're very professional. Not to say that DAs aren't, but it's a different world that they operate in. Most FBI agents are lawyers or accountants. So it's just very different than dealing with local cops and DAs who went from, my friend says, K through JD. They go straight from kindergarten all the way through to law school, and they have no life experience, no perspective, and they're prosecuting people. They have way too much power, and they are deciding a person's fate, whether or not they are ever going to be able to have a license to practice law, medicine, real estate, insurance, could completely change their entire lives just by saying, no, I'm not dismissing the case. I think we have enough to prove it. And then, again, you're up against 12 strangers from the community that you have maybe 10 minutes to question, and they decide your fate. So it's a very scary prospect. And again, I'm extremely grateful that I don't have to make that decision, that my clients get to make that decision. But yeah, it's a very frustrating job at times, but only because I care so much. If I didn't care, I'd be like, all right, whatever. And there are lawyers like that. There are lawyers that go through the motions. But luckily, the people I know, the people that I'm closest to are really passionate about what we do, and it's a calling.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you can work doing something that you really care about.
Absolutely. Yeah, they know what they say.
It really matters in the world.
When they say love what you do, never work a day in your life.
Yeah, that's right.
There are days when I work, but a lot of days I'm just really happy to be helping people.
When you work in a field where you're seeing people where so much is on the line, sometimes their lives are on the line, what things have you learned about people?
That's an interesting question. I mean, everybody says to me, this is my life. This is so important to me, and this is like the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. And they don't understand how much I understand that, because I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I do understand how much is on the line, and I do care deeply about the result and what's going to happen to them. And I mean, all I can do is tell them I'm going to do everything I possibly can and listen to them, because really, at the end of the day, I think people just want to be heard. They want their side of the story to be heard. They want to be understood. And so if I can do that for someone, I think that that's a lot of it. But then, of course, obviously knowing what I'm doing is a big part of it as well. But yeah, I mean, I just pool all of my resources of knowledge and experience and compassion and put them to work.
What are some of the most interesting cases you've worked on?
I
must
think
have some great stories.
I have a lot of great stories. I told you the Aryan Brotherhood guy.
Yeah.
$1 billion investment fraud where the investor was actually an FBI agent pretending to be a billionaire, and he's going to invest with these guys who believe that there are these boxes with treasury funds in them and that they're going to be billionaires. And they really, truly believe this. It's crazy. They just drink the Kool-Aid. And so that's an argument. Like, Your Honor, this guy just believed it. He wasn't lying. He really thought this was real. But people part with tons of money and, their life savings, all the equity in their homes, their retirement accounts, and then never see a dime. It's hard to really think of one interesting case. I mean, Matt's case is certainly very interesting, and the turn that it took was certainly fun.
Super interesting.
Super interesting. And again, I knew nothing about bookmaking or how it works, or that Matt was the bank. Matt was the one taking all the risk. And so he was paying all the money, but he was also getting all the money, and most of the time people lose. But I thought in the recesses of my mind, if I ever thought about bookies, that they would like go to Vegas and place a bet for you. But that's not at all how it works.
Matt's case was so interesting because he was a bookmaker for some of the biggest gamblers ever.
Yeah.
But then he was also a huge gambler.
Exactly. So he had a gambling
I think he
addiction.
said he bet like $4 million on the Super Bowl.
Yes, and he lost it.
And lost it. And then
But then the next day he won it back or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so I knew nothing about that world. It's another example of even after 30 years, I can learn something completely new and then really see how money laundering works. And then the main issue in his case, because it seems like, the bookmaking is the sexy issue, but that wasn't it. It was the taxes, that he didn't report all of his illegal earnings because he lost so much of his money in Vegas. So he didn't report it because as far as he was concerned, he didn't have any income that year. And so he got hit with a $1.6 million.
What is the common thread you see throughout a lot of your cases? Is it that people want to get rich quick?
Yes, I think greed is definitely something that people admit to very frequently. I just got greedy. They see a shortcut. They see a way to do it. And it's the same thing with drug dealers. They don't want to do the work. They don't want, they just think, oh, I'm just going to take this shortcut. I'm going to get money from people or whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah, they don't want to do the work. They get greedy and they convince themselves that it's okay. There's definitely a switch that goes in their brain that tells them, that justifies it, that rationalizes it. And they just think it's okay to do it. I mean, I've had clients who were not nice people. One guy stole $22 million in an investment fraud case. All of his victims were in court, and they all spoke. We have this one judge in Santa Ana, David Carter, who is just incredible. And he let every single one of them speak. We were there for hours. And every single one of them said, I gave him my life savings, I gave him my pension, I gave him my home equity. And I promised him that my client would pay them back. And Judge Carter looked at the victims and said, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're not getting your money back. Based on his years on the bench, he knew that that was going to be the case. And we walked out of court that day, and I looked at my client, and he goes, they're not getting a dime. Fuck those people. And I was so startled. I was so upset. Some people have sociopathic tendencies, in case that guy is watching. I don't want to call him a sociopath, but yeah, that was pretty harsh. That was pretty shocking to me. I got a call the other day from a grandmother of a guy who's in custody right now on a human trafficking case, and I read the complaint, and it was very violent, and I did not want the case. I just don't think that I would be comfortable. And I do believe everyone deserves a defense. I'm not saying that they don't, but I think that would have been a very difficult case for me to defend. I don't know that I don't think he would have fought it. I think he would have taken a deal. And plus he was looking at a 15-year mandatory minimum, so there wasn't that much I could do for him. It was a gang case. It was just ugly. So yeah, there are just the spectrum of people that I deal with every single day, and it's fascinating. It's also exhausting. There are times when I really need to reset, and I really need to just step back and go stick my feet in the ocean. Thank God we live close to the beach, and I can do that.
Mm-hmm. Is it difficult to accept that ultimately it's out of your control? I mean, you can do as much as you can to defend someone, but at some point the judge will decide what he's going to decide. It's
very difficult. It's infuriating. Like even with Matt's case, he's ecstatic over the sentence he got, 1 year and a day. And I'm not. I'm upset. And I was arguing with the U.S. attorney before his sentencing. They were recommending 15 months, so I got the judge down a little bit. But she was saying, I heard him on a podcast saying that he was expecting this. And I said, let me be very clear with you. He's happy. I'm not. Because I felt that I had legitimate arguments that really needed to be considered, and I didn't feel that they were being considered. And so I get very frustrated, and it was also during this process of working on Matt's sentencing, because we submit memoranda, and it's a lot of work to prepare for sentencing in federal court. It's the biggest part of the case, really. Although in Matt's case, the whole thing was big, because we're working out the deal as we go. There are compromises the government made along the way. But I was working on it, and I was noticing my competitive nature, and that I do want to win. And in fact, I had a trial that I lost a couple years ago, and I really believe my client was innocent again, which is why he went to trial. And I cried. after the verdict on the way home. And it was for my client and his family because I really liked them. But it was also like, God damn it, I'm due a break. Like, because it's hard. You very, very infrequently win as a criminal defense attorney because the cards are stacked against us. So unless you have a rock solid case, and I have a friend who will only take those cases, so he will always win. But, if somebody wants to hire me and they say they're innocent, we're going to roll the dice. But yeah, it's very difficult to accept a sentence when I think the judge is wrong or a verdict when I think the jury has it wrong. There was one trial I did years ago. It was this 80-year-old man. He was charged with Medicare fraud. He was delivering Ensure to old people. And it was the people that were billing Medicare that were the ones committing fraud. He didn't know anything. He was delivering cans of Ensure, dropping them off in front of people's houses. And they charged him with Medicare fraud. And they found him guilty. And I mean, even the judge and the prosecutor thought we were going to get a not guilty. And we're all supposed to rise when the jury stands and walks out of the courtroom. I didn't. I was like, fuck you. I'm not standing for you people. So yeah, there are times where it is extremely difficult to accept, like with that bank robbery case. It's just, because I truly believe that this person is defensible. And when it isn't acknowledged, it's really, really, really hard. And especially when we get, it depends, like the first thing we do when we draw a judge in federal court is look up who appointed them. Is this a liberal judge or a conservative judge? And if it's a conservative judge, we're fucked. And even some of the liberal judges, some of the Obama appointees in Los Angeles are really, really tough. It's the luck of the draw. And that's another thing that should not be a factor in our criminal justice system. It should not vary from judge to judge, especially in the federal system, which is designed to have consistency. That's why we have the federal sentencing guidelines as the starting point of every sentence. But you can have one judge who will give the person home confinement, and that very same case, very same facts, a different judge will send that person to prison for years. And it is really, really frustrating when you get that draw. Somebody called me last week and said, I called you because I heard you've had success with this really tough judge. And when I hear this judge's name, I'm like, okay, I'll do it. But it's hard. It's really hard. But then the same is true when I get a great judge. I'm like, oh, thank God. You're in the best hands. You're in great hands. And like with Matt Boyer's case, I had, I think, a relatively conservative judge. He's a Trump appointee. He went to MIT. He was an intellectual property attorney. He's a brilliant guy. But he really listens. He's really smart. And I felt like he heard everything I said to him at sentencing. And he was looking in my eyes, and he was nodding, and he was acknowledging things, and he was looking at references that I was citing. And, I think he really heard everything I said. And I know he read everything I submitted. And that's one of the great things about federal court and federal judges as well, is that I know they read everything. There are some state court judges I'm never quite sure if they've read my motion before they deny it. Federal judges, and I learned that early on when I asked Judge Carter if he had read my sentencing memo, and he got very upset with me for questioning that. So I will never ask that question again. I start with, I know you've read my papers, I just would like to add, So that is also a joy when the judge is the smartest person in the room, and I kind of have to let it go and let them do their thing. And
Do you ever represent people you know are guilty?
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. I don't care. I don't care what you did. I just want to help you. Yeah. And somebody asked me just yesterday, would you ever want to be a judge? And my answer was no. The reason is because I would never want to be responsible for making those decisions about people's lives.
How do you feel if you're representing somebody you know is guilty and you're successful and they get off?
I don't think I've ever had that happen where I've gone to trial and a guilty person was acquitted. I had a client that I really disliked, and he got a very low sentence, and I was like, of all clients, to get that sentence. It was frustrating. Like, couldn't you have given that to somebody else that I like better? But it is what it is. I mean, that's just, we have to accept it. Again, I mean, I have no control over the outcome in these cases. It is 100% out of my control once
What are the factors that will make a jury will change a jury's mind about somebody?
I mean, it just depends.
Is it their personality? Is it the way they're
most defendants don't testify, and I always wonder if that's a problem because, first of all, if a defendant testifies and they have priors, that can come in. If they don't testify, it can't come in as character evidence. But there's another philosophy that you're shifting the burden to the defense by having your client explain their innocence when the burden of proof is on the people or the government to prove somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's always the argument of these are the elements of the offense, and the government has not proven every element beyond a reasonable doubt. And I go through the different burdens of proof. There's reasonable suspicion, there's probable cause, there's preponderance of the evidence in a civil case, which is just a little bit. There's clear and convincing evidence, which is enough to take someone's kids away from them. And beyond a reasonable doubt is greater than all of that. So I tell juries, this is the biggest decision you're ever going to make in your life because it will permanently impact this person's life. You can't take it back. It's not like getting married where you can get divorced. It's not like buying a house where you can sell the house. It's bigger than that. And I hope that you will take that responsibility as seriously as it is given to you. But I fear that there are jurors who just want to go home. How many times have I been asked, how do I get out of jury duty? And I say, if you were in trouble, wouldn't you want to be on your jury? We need good people. And when I see jurors hanging out in the hallways, I smile at them. I say, thank you for your service, because it is a service. We wouldn't have this system if people didn't show up. But yeah, there are people where I'm like, ooh, I don't want you on my jury. You're an idiot. Or, you're obviously biased towards the prosecution. Or he wouldn't be here if he hadn't done something, So it can be a really, really frustrating job. And I think that probably once a day I'm frustrated. But then there are those moments when my client gets to go home and his wife sends me a video of his kids hugging him that make it all worthwhile. His dog's jumping on him. Like that for me is the most amazing moment ever.
How have your views changed over the 30 years you've been doing this?
Oh, certainly I understand things a lot better.
Yeah, I'll bet.
My eyes have been open, like I said, to the underbelly of society and how a lot of the underbelly is white-collar criminals. People just, because they wear a suit and they carry themselves into court in a different way than maybe a gangbanger whose pants are falling off and is covered with tattoos, doesn't mean that they're not, I don't want to use derogatory words towards my potential clients, but, it is a very interesting thing. And the bias is, you're right. Like people think that, a white urban or suburban, I should say, a white suburban couple is, there's not going to be domestic violence, when in fact it happens every single day. It doesn't matter that they're not from the street or that they're not from the ghetto. It happens everywhere. There are, as the heroin epidemic is based on or has gotten much, much worse because of painkillers and doctors prescribing painkillers. I've had those cases too where people are shopping for pills, people who are just prescribing pills. My perspective has changed because I've met the people who are doing these things, and they're just people. They're just people, and shit happens. And like I said, but for the grace of God, go you and I, And everyone deserves a defense. Everyone deserves to be heard.
And let me ask you one last question. What would you say is the most important thing you've learned in your years doing this?
That everyone deserves a defense, and that the criminal justice system is not perfect, and it is not just a lot of the time. And that's heartbreaking, and every single one of my clients has that experience. Wow, it's so different than I thought it was going to be. It is, in some ways, political. People are trying to keep their job by getting statistics, getting wins, getting convictions. But I think it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see how often cops lie, how often cops do things the wrong way, and then judges will turn a blind eye, and prosecutors will defend them. In my opinion, a lot of them are gangbangers, but the prosecutors will defend them because, they had the right to do this, that, or the other thing, and they'll, argue some case that was wrongly decided. So again, we're just like the Supreme Court just the other day said that it's okay for ICE to pick up people because they look Hispanic and they speak Spanish and they have low-paying jobs. It's outrageous. Sonia Sotomayor wrote the dissent. Our Constitution is being whittled away. And so I see that every day, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see, people say, well, what about this? What about that? Like, yeah, in a perfect world, this is not a perfect world. We do the best we can with what we've got.
Amazing talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're amazing. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.